There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Microbizer.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Tonight, we're going to be covering some new information, and perhaps not as new as some are claiming, but there's some, there has been, the judge gave the gag order on the quadruple murders of Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan. And that means there's not supposed to be any information going out from the prosecution and the defense. They're not supposed to talk about the case. However, there has been things called leaks. And I always hated leaks when I was on the police department, because what that is either people from our department, which it was the NYPD when I was on, or people from the prosecution, or people that have knowledge of the case, leaking things to the press. And that, in the press, I include the broadcast media also. That certainly does not help the case. And it hurts the case. And clearly, someone is leaking information to News Nation and to Ashley Banfield. And, one of the things I would ask, and Ashley Banfield has no responsibility to tell us, she has freedom of the press to tell us who her sources are, but how do we know, as the public and people that are reporting on the reporters, how do we know that this information is accurate? How do we know? Like, we try to just use information that is vetted and is verified by the police or the prosecutor. We try to do that. It's not always possible to do that, like we're commenting today. And this information is coming from an unverified source. So to talk about that tonight, I brought on one of the very best, retired NYPD Sergeant and Professor Mike Geary from Albertus Magnus College in New Haven, Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, Billy. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think you're a fan favorite, so it's not that I can't pull you back now. They would revolt against me. So, but Mike, you were listening to everything I just said, and what are your feelings on it?
I think the gag order, and it has played a tremendous part in this. The dearth of information out there for the mass media to spread to the public, I think, is making the talking heads out there desperate for some any sort of tidbit information, relaying rumors. And the problem is, in a gag order in a much lower profile case wouldn't be such a problem. But in a case like this that has actually had international news coverage across Asia and across Europe, it makes it real. It gets people desperate to for any sort of tidbit, and unfortunately, it spreads rumors and makes people desperate to look for leaks in any way possible. And unfortunately, as you and I know, leaks will occur. And in a case like this, there'll probably be more leaks. This isn't the last leak. I'm sure it'll be one of many.
Mike, I would always hate when it happened when I was on the NYPD, and you really didn't know who was doing it. But a lot of times, the leaks would come right from one police plaza. That's, if you folks out from outside of New York City, that's basically the command and control center of the entire NYPD. That's where all the paper is pushed out of that building, And a lot, you can see I have such a deep love for 1PP. But so out of 1PP, of course, the chief of detectives office, all the major offices, all the major chiefs, all the big bosses, the police commissioners down there. Sometimes the information that we as police officers, detectives, whoever, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, some of the information we don't want out there, but at least with the NYPD, they had this transparency policy that they would push a lot of information out there to the press that we as investigators didn't necessarily want out there. In fact, we felt it hurt the case. However, when you're a soldier and not a general, you do what you take your orders from the general.
Yeah, we a lot of as a patrol sergeant, one of the things I didn't want anyone to know, and of course the detectives would be the only other ones to know, would be, an instrument used in the killing. We wouldn't want to have that out there in the general public. Positions of people in whatever rooms they were found in, any other tangential things that only a possible killer would know, so that therefore we'd be able to vet anyone who is just putting out some sort of confession for a headline. You'd be amazed, and maybe the public doesn't realize it, how many people who falsely confess to a crime. And then when they're asked, okay, well, how did you do it? Then they start guessing. And then the detectives have to know then at that point that they're not genuine. But you do get a lot of strange things going on, a lot of people calling up the police department and trying to get some sort of 30 seconds of fame when there's a highly publicized homicide, and they get the facts wrong. And unfortunately, sometimes facts that we want to keep out of the public's view get put in there into the newspapers, on the radio, and things like that. And it makes it more difficult for you and Phil to go out there and do your job.
I would just like to also add, in case some of our listeners and our viewers don't know, giving information out against a judge's gag order is a charge called contempt of court, which you can go to jail for. If there's no teeth in the law, what's the point of the judge giving a gag order? So who's ever doing this, whoever did this, if they do get caught, and they know it's difficult to get caught, the NYPD actually would go as far as dumping the phones of the detectives. I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
They do an investigation on the detectives. And back when a lot of this was happening, the detectives weren't even issued department phones. They had their own personal phones. So they're actually getting search warrants on their personal phones to see where the leak came from. So they were very serious about leaks because, let's face it, 1PP wanted to do the leaks. They didn't want some little detective doing it, right?
Right. They wanted control of the information, whether it was prudent to give the information out. They wanted the ability to do it. And also, the public might not realize actually how many people are privy to a lot of the facts. The patrol officers are privy to the facts. The witnesses are privy to the facts. You've got the patrol sergeants privy to the facts. The detective sergeants, secretaries. You've got all of these people who receive copies of various reports at various times over the course of investigations. And there's nothing to take a picture of the piece of paper on your cell phone and send it to somebody. All kinds of ways that information gets out, and it can sometimes be devastating. It's not more annoying, it's devastating sometimes.
Mike, I think you were probably retired by this time, but when the new DD5 system came in and it was on computer, and in essence, you could search a name citywide, and if it popped in another detective's case, which is a great investigative tool, you'd be told about it. But a danger of this was that people on the department had access to some of these cases. There was some security to it, like they would have to log in, and someone may ask, why were you looking at this case in such and such? Oh, it could be because my brother is involved in that case, which is a real security problem, So these leaks, again, let me play a little bit of Ashley Banfield from last night, and we'll talk about this after she goes on the screen.
News on the Idaho murder case. A couple of sources with knowledge of the investigation have told News Nation some details that up until now we did not know. Let me lay a few of these details out, but I do want to warn you that this is graphic information and it is uncomfortable to hear this because we're talking about innocent kids who were killed in that home back in October. And not only that, this is evidence that likely will come out in court at some point. Whether it will be germane to who the killer is or not, that remains to be seen. But it could be evidence nonetheless. With that.
See, Mike, early on in her report, she said some sources.
Right.
That are close to the investigation. I mean, isn't that the funny thing? A source close to the investigation told us, but can we, or can the consumer can John Q. public listening to this report trust her sources that they're truthful?
Probably not. I'm going to guess there's probably at least a 50-50 chance this stuff might be just rumor. You know, depending on what she's saying, some of the things we know are somewhat correct. Some of the information that is already been out there, and there's a reinterpretation of the information. But you just love that phrase, a source close to the investigation. You know, it's so general. It could be somebody from ME's office. It could be somebody from the sheriff's office, the FBI's office, the Musco Police Department's office. It could be third-hand rumor, but they always use that phrase to try to give it some sort of reliability and initial.
And, you know, Mike, and also the fact that it flies in the face of information that we had previously,
right?
That we thought was vetted and was gospel truth. Now we're being told it's not. Let me get back to this.
Yeah.
That in mind, let me let you know what these sources have told News Nation. Number one, they told us that the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, were killed first, and they confirmed that Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle were killed on the second floor afterwards. And these are some of the...
So, Mike, again, that was the facts that we were told also, that Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan were killed first, and they were on the third floor. But some of the details now coming after this are something new, something that we're hearing now, and something that we're getting from only sources that we don't know who these sources are. I would just like to add, early on in this investigation, just to show you how deep leaks go in an investigation, many talking heads, specifically many FBI agents who were plugged in, knew about the eyewitness way before it was ever released. I'm talking days after the case unfolded. They had heard. There were rumors. A lot of the rumors that came out early in this investigation, in fact, they were true. So they were more than rumors. They were true, but they were being leaked. Again, being leaked. So how this hurts the investigation, you know, will determine down the road. Okay, let me get back to this.
Other details that they have released. They said that Ethan Chapin was killed in the doorway of Xana Kernodle's room before the killer set upon Xana. The sources say that it appeared Ethan had stepped partly into the hallway where the attack may have begun. These sources also say that Ethan Chapin suffered a slash to the neck. But I have to say that both of these details are in direct conflict with what the coroner had originally told us right here on this program exclusively. And also, they conflict directly with what police have said as well. And those two facts that are in conflict are that all of the victims were in their beds, according to police and the coroner. And according to the coroner, all of the injuries were stab wounds and not slash wounds. So I just want to play for you exactly what it was the coroner said in her words. Were any of them slashed? Were any of their necks cut? Or were these all puncture wounds?
Well, it was a pretty large knife, so it's really hard to call them puncture wounds. And they were definitely stabbings.
Can you tell me, when you say that they might have been sleeping, were they found?
This interview that we're watching now happened very, very early on in the investigation. In fact, perhaps there it is, November 17th. Right. So that was 4 days. This happened on November 13th. If you've watched Duty Ron's show and you're familiar with death investigator Barbara Butcher, who, in my opinion, is probably one of the greatest death investigators in the country in the last 30 years. She was the chief of staff of the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. She has some things to say about coroners that aren't that sort of criticize the system of a coroner. For example, the coroner for this county, who you're looking at on the screen, she's an RN, so she's a registered nurse. which is great, and she has a law degree. So she's not a pathologist. She's not a medical doctor. So, and the fact being that Moscow, Idaho, this was their first murder in 7 years. So she's not a very experienced coroner either in regards to death investigations. So I take a little bit of what she says with a grain of salt. I'll put it that way. Mike?
Absolutely. If you go back and I was just rereading the affidavit, the original affidavit in support of Brian Koberger's arrest, and it talks, and the investigator, who's the corporal in the Moscow Police Department, does his narration, to establish probable cause. And he talks about, and when you read it and you go through it, and Billy, you've been through this 10 times. I've probably been through it 10 times. You're reading it over and you're analyzing what it says, trying to figure out timeline, place, put it all together. And you realize that, Kernodle and Chapin were killed second, and Gonzalez was they were upstairs on the third floor. They were killed first. You could deduce that from just reading very carefully several times the affidavit. So that's nothing new. But however, the affidavit does not include any information about Chapin possibly being stabbed in the hallway. It just says that his body and Ms. Kernodle's body were found in the second floor bedroom. It's possible that there's obviously there's a lot more information than what is put into an affidavit, but that leak that the attack occurred in the hallway obviously came from inside the investigation, and probably someone who was actually there taking crime scene photographs, doing blood analysis at the scene, and saw blood that was later identified as Mr. Chapin's out in the hallway. He may have probably died. He was probably mortally wounded, and then he passed in the bedroom trying to protect Ms. Kernodle. So some of that information,
Mike, which makes it even more disturbing that this really in-depth crime scene recreation, crime scene analysis of where each one of the victims were prior to the attack, and now talking about how what was earlier reported is untrue. This is the truth. These sources, and I find it a little bit disturbing because, it hurts the case. It definitely hurts the case.
Remember, this is going out to everyone in the nation and people in Moscow, Idaho, who potentially could be jurors sitting, on a jury in this case. They're hearing information at a time when they're, maybe shouldn't be hearing this information, because this information may or may not be revealed. As she even said, may or may not be relevant. It may be admitted. It may not be admitted. We don't know. And so there's information going out there that may actually be very vital to the investigation, and absolutely now to the trial of Brian Koberger. And to release that information in violation of this gag order, Ms. Ashley Banfield has her job to do, but I wish she would, just be a little bit more discreet with this information. And the person giving it to her is risking their job and risking a contempt charge.
Absolutely.
And then the other part that she talks about with the difference between a stab wound, a puncture wound, a slash. At this point, that's really very specific. I don't think the coroner in this case actually said anything that was a direct contradiction to what we know already. But, the idea that, as she mentioned, it's a very large knife. What's the difference really between a slash and a stabbing? Maybe very little when there's a Mortal Kombat scene going on, and a puncture wound. A knife that big probably doesn't make a puncture. We're not talking about a dagger or like an ice pick.
But Mike, you know what I question? I question whether the coroner, we just talked about her qualifications, whether she's qualified to say this, to deduct this, to come, or that is really the job of the pathologist, who in depth after the autopsies will have an anatomical chart where he
Exactly.
or she will show every single stab wound and will have a report what the opinion was. What type of, was it a stab wound? Was it a slashing wound?
Right.
Did it cause an arterial gush? What kind of blood spatter did it cause? All of those things can be in the anatomical chart. So I don't know, and I don't mean to beat her down, but I don't know if at this point, 4 days later, the coroner, who probably was at the autopsy, but not as personally involved in it as the pathologist who's
Right.
actually doing the autopsy, is she qualified enough to give this report on what had occurred?
She's probably reiterating things that were told to her while afterwards, or after or while the pathologist was doing the autopsies on the 4 deceased. She herself did not perform them, and so the information she's giving is secondhand information. And again, it's like you tell a story to one person, have them tell another story, tell the same story to someone else. After 10 people have heard it, the story is very different from the original version.
Mike, it's called telephone, and we used to play that when we were in elementary school, right?
Right.
Put something in
Way
someone's
back.
ear, have them
Way
pass it
back.
on. Let's get back to this and
Found in beds.
Yes.
So those were the facts that the coroner told us. And like I said, it is in direct conflict with what these 2 sources familiar with the investigation are now telling us as well. That obviously needs to be sorted out and likely best in a court of law as well. Also want to tell you these other details that we have learned from these 2 sources, that Xana Kernodle put up a fierce fight when the attacker set upon her, repeatedly grabbing the attacker's knife, so much so that she sustained deep cuts to her fingers and that her fingers were nearly severed. Now, that does actually work in comport with what Xana's father had reported to an Arizona news outlet about what he knew. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to
so that's pretty disturbing.
Yes.
In fact, very, very disturbing, And one of the things I said earlier on, and I had said it numerous times, there were rumors in the very beginning of this case that, in fact, Xana Kernodle had fought fiercely. The rumors, if this is true, they turned out to be true days after this occurred. So there were even leaks back then. Are these things that perhaps the investigators told the family of Xana Kernodle to put them at peace and to see that their daughter fought hard for her life, which everyone, of course, wants to hear that their loved one fought really hard? One of the things this says to me also, if she fought this hard, there is no doubt, and we've had Ed Wallace, we've had Barbara Butcher say there's a 99.9% chance that this perpetrator, and that was before they knew who it was, cut himself and left his blood in this crime scene. I still feel that way today, and I will always feel that way. And I think they have blood DNA of Brian Koberger in this crime scene.
Yeah, it would be a shock to everyone if he did not stab himself in the frenzy. If you're in a being attacked or you're attacking somebody and they're fighting back and they're grabbing that knife and it's a power struggle over that knife, you're going to end up cutting your weak hand, forearm. You cut your leg or something like that. I think this information about Ms. Kernodle probably was given to the family to just reassure them. And as a dad, with daughters, I would want to think that my daughter fought valiantly, and at least I would have some slight measure, of some peace, whatever it might be, just to think that my daughter put up a fight and fought bravely against this person. And perhaps she also got this information from the pathologist and indicated, like you say, on drawings and on photographs that were taken of the body. And she saw these photographs, up close. But that's something that still shouldn't. And I wish that the parents had not given those interviews, like Mr. Gonsalves and Mr. Kernodle. I mean, they're hurting. God bless them. and they want to be able to speak on behalf of their children. I understand it. But these are some of the details maybe that should not have been spoken, because this may come out
Absolutely.
in the trial.
Very, very, very also, when this stuff gets out, and of course it's going to come out during the trial, but it's very, very, very painful for the families to hear this. And I would imagine they're probably told a lot of this early on, so they don't get it from the press. Instead, they get it from the investigators. They get it from the police. They get it from the district attorney, and in a closed door meeting with the family, instead of hearing it on TV, where it's, commercial television trying to be somewhat sensational with some of this stuff. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. Police Off the Cuff. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends. Tell Police Off the Cuff to your family, your friends, and share it with them. And also, if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. You see the folks in the chat with the green font. They're all part of our YouTube family, our subs, our friends, and we appreciate them so much. So, Mike, let's continue. Now, Ashley Banfield puts on 2 talking heads, and very intelligent guy. The one guy's a homicide detective from Texas, and the other one, of course, is the professor from forensic professor. Let me put that on the screen, and we're going to also comment about this, because she delivers to them what she has just found out. And is it possible, or is it improbable what we just learned? And that's what Ashley Banfield is talking about right now with these 2. I call them talking heads, but they're actually very, very competent talking heads. And we'll play this.
And this new information that is coming to us from sources close to the investigation, it really does fly in the face of what the coroner had reported earlier. Is it possible that both things can be true at the same time, what the coroner said and what these sources have said?
Well, good to be back with you, Ashley. Yes, the short answer is yes. When I listened to what the coroner shared, those are very, very general terms, very general comments. So, and now we're talking about specifics. So yes, in the big picture of things, both of those statements are going to be accurate.
And then the notion that Ethan may have made his way partially out into the hallway. Is it possible that maybe the attack began there, but then ended in the bed? And forensically speaking, and I'll get Joseph Scott Morgan to add to this in a moment, they would be able to tell, the murder investigators would be able to tell?
I think so. I had talked about this before, that it's certainly possible that the evil doer, I will not say his name, did not know about Ethan being present in the house. So he is going to be kind of like a Ron Goldman, Nicole Brown situation, where he is collateral damage. He has to address the fact that he has an unknown present in front of him. So I don't think that he is...
Mike, we can conjecture on this, but neither you nor I are crime scene experts. Ed Wallace would probably be able to read this crime scene like he was reading a book, from the blood evidence, the blood spatter, perhaps bloody footprints, perhaps many other evidentiary things in regards to how they were killed. And he could tell us what happened almost exactly. I can't do that. I don't have that talent. I don't know if this gentleman on the screen right now has that talent to do that. But the blood spatter, and it's called BSA, blood stain pattern analysis. And crime scene investigators can read that and actually tell the chronology of the attack, and also tell to a lesser extent the type of wounds that were inflicted by the stabber. Now, when he talks about the two girls upstairs, Kylie Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, there's a good possibility that Ethan heard the attack and got up from the bed and then was met with the attacker, with Brian Koberger, if we believe it is him that committed this heinous crime. He very much could have met him in the hallway.
That's
And
right.
that's a distinct possibility. And again, Ashley Banfield is getting this from two sources, unnamed sources close to the investigation. So we don't know if this is true or what, but two unnamed sources close to the investigation. Now, could this be accurate? Yeah, it could be. And the fact that very early on in this investigation, the rumor came out that Xana Kernodle fought for her life, fought so hard. I potentially believe it probably is true.
Sure.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, probably you're right. If the chronology that we believe from the affidavit, the arrest warrant affidavit, is true, and obviously it supported probable cause and is, it's a lot of the investigation results up to that point. Most likely scenario is that Koberger got into the house through the back, and he was stealthy. He got up to the third floor. He had the surprise, the element of surprise. He had the knife already ready to go, and he attacked them first. There in the affidavit, they could hear noise, and someone said, "Is there someone in the house?" They might not have realized what the noise was through the walls and whatever carpeting there is down on the second floor. According to DM, she heard that several times. Someone saying, "Is there someone in the house?" And that's probably when she opened up the door. I think the third time she actually opened up the door is when she saw the tall guy with the mask over his face and the bushy eyebrows. And someone had said, "I'm here to help you," or "I'll help you," which we're not sure. I think it's Ethan Chapin, mortally wounded, trying to give comfort to Kernodle. I'm not sure about that. But at that point, by the time Koberger gets down to the second floor, there are people who are now alert and awake and even Kernodle, we believe, had got the DoorDash and was on TikTok. So she might have fallen asleep with the TikTok on her phone.
Mike, that's one of the reasons I think the timeline to this is so tight.
Oh yeah. It's like this.
Yeah, you have that the DoorDash delivery.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility that the DoorDash deliverer is an eyeball witness?
I would not be surprised. It is so tight because he makes the delivery, according to affidavit, just about exactly 4 a.m. I'm sure when they get to the location, kind of like UPS and stuff, they have to get on their phone, type in maybe they delivered it or something like that. The time that they bring their food. So it's about 4 a.m. and we believe the attacks occurred somewhere within like a minute or maybe two of that. It's very likely he may have got back into his car to drive away and actually saw the white Hyundai or saw someone walking towards the house. And he just might have just looked at them, through the car window glass and just noticed that there's a figure there, which would really give the very beginning of that crime scene taking place. It's a real tight crime scene. It would not surprise me whatsoever if he's the one that may have got the beginning time, and also saw that figure right there at that location.
Absolutely.
When he gets to Ethan and makes that attack, it is certainly possible that he falls back into the bedroom, onto the bed, and then Xana at that point understands if there's something going on. She may already be awake, as Ethan is, and then once he has taken care of Ethan, then he goes after Xana, and she is awake and aware, which gives her the ability to put up a heck of a fight. And unfortunately, of course, it turned out the way it did. So I would say that if the information that you've received is correct, is accurate, that it certainly falls in line with what we were told in very general terms at the beginning of this, and then what the evidence, as far as I was concerned, had led me to speculate on. So yes.
So Joseph Scott Morgan, I was trying to be as tender as possible with the coroner in asking the nature of this is before we ever knew anything about the nature of the stabbings, and I asked if any of the victims had been slashed, and she seemed to be very clear that these were all stab wounds. But these sources are saying that, you know, Ethan had been slashed, that his neck had been slashed, and that was the original injury he received. I guess the same question for you. Can those two things still be true? Can a coroner consider a slash a stab?
If her assessment was made merely by what she saw at the scene, I'd say, yeah, they could be true. Those two things could be true.
Well, I'll stop you right there. I asked her that. I said, were you present for the autopsies? And she said, yes.
No, I said at the scene. If she made that assessment at the scene, just to be very blunt with you, these injuries are going to be encrusted with blood. It's hard to make that assessment at the scene. However, if she went to the post, this would have been easily visualized at that point in time. And not only is the injury to the neck a slash, allegedly, according to this person, but these injuries that you're talking about on the hands, these are going to be incised wounds as well. Not necessarily slashes, but this is as a result of grabbing hold of the blade and pulling it through the hand. These are not stab wounds. I can tell you that definitively based upon my experience. So yeah, there probably are some stab wounds, but that information is, you need more clarity here as to what she's saying. And that's, I guess at the end of the day, it's not really the point. I would draw into question what kind of exam was conducted on site at the scene when.
This is really all conjecture right now because no one knows. I mean, she's getting this information from the coroner 4 days after these attacks. We know a hell of a lot more right now than we knew. This happened on the 13th. The interview she did with the coroner was on the 17th. We know a hell of a lot more right now. The other thing I alluded to earlier was that the coroner does an in-depth analysis and written report with anatomical figures to show exactly how, where, and how many stab wounds and what kind of stab wounds they are. In fact, usually the pathologist will say stab wound number 5 was a fatal stab wound. They can determine that through the autopsy. So right now, this is a lot of, and I respect both of these guys, Mr. Scott Morgan, the brilliant professor, brilliant forensic scientist, and also this the gentleman from Texas who's the homicide investigator. But they're also they're talking heads right now. They're going on conjecture and the information that these two close to the investigation of folks are giving them.
Right. Yeah. It appears that the coroner was actually standing in the autopsy room when the pathologist was doing the autopsy. And sometimes, depending on, how many people they have in that county doing these sorts of autopsies and how many helpers they have, it's probably likely that the pathologist might have been narrating to the coroner what the findings were, and the coroner might have been taking detailed notes presently at the time in real time as the pathologist is actually doing the autopsy. So there's a narration going on and they're taking notes. And if you look at if you listen, as you listen to it, the interview with the coroner in Banfield, she's answering the question so generally to Ashley Banfield. And so I don't think
because Mike, I don't think she knew. I really don't think she knew at that point.
She herself probably did not handle the bodies,
right,
at all. And so she's either there taking the notes or she read a transcript of the narration later on, that sort of thing. So because she's getting the information secondhand and not firsthand, like you say, she may not have known, or it could be she knew, but she didn't want to be so specific, because then if she's really specific, then it may come out that she's contradicted later on. And so maybe she didn't want to do that, perhaps.
You know, Mike, I want to play the rest of this, and then I would really like to get into a little bit about the attorney for Brian Koberger and some of the discovery materials. I think that's very important. But I'd like to finish playing this because this is really the meat and potatoes of this interview. And, you know, the sources close to the information, these two gentlemen, even though they're very accomplished individuals, they can't really dissect this with a great degree of precision because it's coming to them third and fourth hand.
I've always wondered, when did she actually get access to the bodies, and how much exposure did she have to the remains that she would have had to have traveled to Spokane to view those posts, because that's where they were done.
Well, I'll tell you what, I did ask because I know that so much of the reports come in from not only the scene and the logistics of the scene, but also what the medical examiner is able to determine at autopsy. And she said she'd been at both. She was able to confirm the amount of blood in Xana's room was consistent with the injuries that she saw on the scene. So, Phil, I'm going to ask you something that is more about the killer's MO, because Brian Koberger is alleged to have staked out that home, been there many times. His phone had been there at the late night hours many times. And so one would only reason that he would stake it out that night as well, and that he would know that Xana and Ethan had come home and were there together, as opposed to being surprised by that.
Well, I think that's the great unknown here. So we don't know if he was there staking it out and what that time frame was.
Thank you for watching.
So it's this, you know, that is brilliant, and that's a brilliant amount of evidence. The fact that Brian Koberger, and that we have the science that's able to do that, that Brian Koberger had reconned. We call it, that's a real police word, reconnaissance, or actually it's a military word. He had reconned this location at least 12 times. So that could also go to behavioral analysis. Was he a sexual pervert trying to look in the windows? Or did he just get excited to be near the location where he knew in his mind, in his heart, that he was going to commit this heinous crime? So that's all part of the behavioral analysis of this. And, you know, we had Mike Vecchione on, the former Brooklyn district attorney, with the panel of four the other night, which I thought was you know, I shouldn't be the one praising our show, but I thought it was a hell of a good show.
It was.
And Mike Vecchione was trying to play devil's advocate and to show how there's doubt. So what, what do you mean he was reconning? What does that mean? You know, and like we all know as potential folks sitting on a jury, yeah, that means something to me. But again, a defense attorney can say, hey, he lives in the area. Yeah, he drives around there. Oh, really? But he's practically in their driveway, you know?
Right.
But so we know that's very powerful information. But there are those who can, you know, play devil's advocate and say, oh, no, it's not. He lives in the area. He was just driving around, you know? Right.
The one of the points made about Mr. Koberger is that perhaps he was surprised by Ethan Chapin's presence there. And that may be due to the fact that the time, you know, remember the timelines when somebody exactly gets home. We're not exactly sure of the exact minute somebody gets home. We do know what time he turned his phone. Mr. Koberger turned his phone off in Washington. We do know what time he ended up turning it back on. And in between those two times, we do have pictures of him from traffic cameras, more than we ever knew actually even existed, and the doorbell cameras in the area, that he actually was driving around the area, and he actually may have missed in his driving and trying to find a spot the actual time that Gonsalves and Mogan and Chapin and Kernodle actually entered the house. He might have actually missed that, and that would explain why he might have been surprised. I think he probably was surprised. I don't think he would have made the attack if he realized just how many people were there. And in fact, one of them was Mr. Chapin, who's actually about 6'3", 6'4". He's a larger, very large guy, much larger even than Brian Koberger. So it's most likely plausible that he actually did not see those four. So when he was doing his reconnaissance, there's always going to be gaps, in your knowledge. And that's what I think may have happened right around that, 3:45 to 4 o'clock time frame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mike, one of the things I didn't realize, and I'm just seeing it now, and you spoke about how the defense attorney received 900 something pages of discovery. But what I didn't realize is that the defense has to present discovery to the prosecution.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I would think that, they're going to turn over nothing in almost every case. Why would they turn over? Oh no, we're not going to use anything. But isn't that sort of the prosecution has to turn it over, and has to turn it over? Isn't that sort of disingenuous, or allowing for a lot of, I'll use a New York word, fugaziness on the part of the defense? That's a little bit fugazi, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's meant for so that in going forward in the trial from day one, the prosecution will have given all their information that they're planning on using to the defense, all the inculpatory material, which means material that tends to show the guilt of the defendant. They have to turn that over. Basic due process, fairness. It's been like that for 60 years. And a lot of people don't realize, the defense also has to turn over any material that they have, which may be exculpatory, which would show that that the defendant didn't actually partake of the crime. In order to not, it's there. The rule, the reciprocity is there to ensure that there's no gotcha surprise moments in the trial. And so that the trial would proceed along, in an orderly manner. It's got to remember, due process has to be fair to both sides. The defense is the beneficiary of 99% of all of the evidence that's going to be introduced at trial, because the prosecution has it. But there are times when a defense attorney like Ms. Taylor, in this case, she's going to have a small crew of investigators and experts. If they have experts that discover or have theories about the DNA being inconclusive, the collection of the DNA, the keeping of the DNA, the analysis of the DNA, those reports from their own experts, their own DNA experts, would have to be turned over to the prosecutor. If they're investigators, like who are probably retired detectives from forces in the area, they would go out and they would look for witnesses. And if they do find witnesses that say that, Brian Koberger was at a party in Washington up until 3:45 a.m. and he left at 3:45, and there's no possible way that he could be in that place and then 15 minutes later be 20 miles away committing a homicide, a multiple homicide. That sort of information, those detectives, those investigators' reports, the name of those witnesses will be turned over to the prosecutors. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that, but defense has to. There's reciprocity in the discovery rule.
Oh, Mike, that's why we were talking about on the show with Phil Grimaldi, yourself, and Michael Vecchione about what I call, it's a canonism, the perpology, the study of the background of the perp, and that you'll find out a lot of things through doing that, as well as what we call in law enforcement as the victimology. And in this case, there's 4 victims. So each one of those 4 victims, you need to take a deep dive into their background to find out all kinds of things, because you don't want to be surprised when this case goes to court or goes to trial that the defense finds out something that you should have found out that potentially could hurt the case. And now the defense, with their 5 to 6 months of time to investigate this case, they're out there doing the purpology, even though it's their client, and the victimology, because they use it in reverse, the way we reverse of the prosecution. So all of that is so important. I just want to just read a couple of things from someone was asking why in the chat, and I'm not even aware that here, I'll put this on the screen. Steve Roberts, why has the lie detector test given to surviving roommates not been made public yet? And is that how they ruled them out so quick? Steve, nothing that the prosecution does has to be released to the public. They do not have to release anything. You know, if they want, you know, you talk about transparency. They're not required to be transparent to the public. They have to release things to the defense, yes, as discovery. So they're not required to put that out there. Captain Brutus, Bill, keep up the good work. We love your show. With a name like Captain Brutus, thank God you love our show. I wouldn't want you as an enemy. But thank you so much, Captain Brutus. Very nice to hear that you like the show.
Hey, Billy, can I make a comment about the lie detector test?
Sure.
Yeah. The lie detector tests are great investigatory tools. You may have used them in Manhattan North homicide. Phil may have used them in Brooklyn, but because they're not as reliable as we'd like to think they are, the public thinks they're reliable, but the examinations of past cases where lie detector tests were used, we know they're not as reliable as we'd like them to be, and therefore they don't pass the reliability test set by our own Supreme Court and all other state courts. So they're very good, useful investigatory tools. And if someone passed a lie detector test, you put them off to the side and then you concentrate on other people. But the results of a lie detector test can't be used in court to either bolster your credibility or diminish your credibility or attack your credibility because of the inherent unreliability of them. Because people can lie and get away with it, or people may be telling the truth, but they may be very nervous and their heart rate goes up, they start to sweat a little bit, and the blood pressure goes up, and it looks like like what they call, a false positive, where they might be telling the God's honest truth, yet it may indicate that they have trouble, and it looks like, from their pulse and their blood pressure and everything else, that they're actually lying. So it's a great question. And
Mike, you want to hear something funny, and a lot of people are not going to believe this, but never in my entire NYPD career have we ever used a lie detector.
Oh, ever. Not even really? Okay.
Ever. And the second thing I want to make clear too, because a lot of people ask this, never have I ever heard a competent police department anywhere use a medium. And I know that's going to disappoint a lot of people, but it is never, ever, ever used. All right. And I've read the literature, Vernon Gebreath, the Bible for homicide investigation, practical homicide investigation. I don't even know what edition. It's probably up to the 5th edition. He has a whole area in that says, no, don't ever even think of using a medium. So people like it because it's sort of sexy and they actually believe it can work. No, it's not scientific at all.
No, it may be a comfort, maybe to a family that has lost touch with a loved one, or someone disappeared or something like that. If it gives a family comfort, like prayer and other things, great. But as far as police officers and detectives believing it, or it being considered evidence in a case, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
No. And as I said, I've never, ever seen it. And again, we on the NYPD, they actually we're going to start a polygraph unit. Right. And it got actually to the point where they got names from the detective bureau, and it was almost, and then they disbanded the whole idea of it. Yeah. So I don't think it's as common, and the big police departments, I don't see them using it. And
it's a can of worms. It could either help you or hurt you.
Can it be a good investigative tool? Yeah, it's almost like the big bluff. That's what it is. And if you have a good investigator who's a good bluffer in an interview and an interrogation, then you don't need that machine, I don't think.
Yeah. What do you do if your prime suspect says, I'll take a lie detector test, and they pass it?
Right.
You know, they're going to want to introduce that as evidence of their innocence in the defendant's case in chief, to attack the credibility of everything the prosecutor and the detectives have done. Yeah, it's one of those things. You don't want to open up that can of worms, because
Mike, it's like doing a gunshot residue test to see if someone fired a gun.
right.
And that's like an absolute test. The
Mhm.
person either has gunshot residue on their hand or they don't. So for the most part, police departments don't like to do that, because how do they know the guy didn't wash his hands off or wipe
Right.
his hands off before they got there?
Exactly.
And then it's going to come up negative and he could be the shooter. And then because it came up negative, now in court, they have to say, yes, we did a gunshot residue test
And he came up
passed.
right.
So then the jury, thinking in absolutes, oh, no gunshot residue, he's not the shooter.
He can't be.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's why police departments don't do that. I just want to do a quick, folks, if you're looking for an outstanding defense attorney in the New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your guy. He's a retired NYPD police officer. He's a great friend of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and he's an outstanding defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. His website is jmurray-law.com. Great friend of the show, Joe Murray. So, yeah, I think that's interesting, because many folks that listen to true crime and many folks that are interested in this, they think polygraphs and mediums. Oh my God.
Right.
That's polygraphs and mediums. What's that? That's from the Wizard of Oz. Oh my. But no, it's not something that's routinely used. So,
not at
but
all.
I want to play a little bit more of of this, another Koberger, another Ashley Banfield interview from last night, and we're going to play a little bit of this in regards to the attorney.
The public defender, Ann Taylor, is still on Brian Koberger's case. She has not recused herself, and she is back in the news again tonight. Prosecution asked her to share any evidence that might tend to prove Koberger's innocence, and this week she responded. It's called a discovery request. She said that they have nothing to turn over at this time, writing, and I quote, "There are no books, papers, documents, photographs, or copies, or portions thereof in the possession of the defendant at this time, which will be submitted at the time of trial." And she goes on to say, there are no results, reports of physical or mental examinations or scientific tests, which are in the possession of the defendant at this time. Joining me now is Jennifer Koffendorfer. She's a former FBI special agent with 28 years in federal law enforcement. So Jennifer, hearing about, I'm going to get you to sort of respond to all of the things that were reported.
I don't think we need to listen to that, but I wanted to. I sort of jumped the gun and I went to the discovery before I played this.
No, it's good. We
But, what
we talked about.
Yeah, the defense attorney now. Just let's say, not even in this case, why would a defense attorney turn over something that would help the prosecution when they could just deny that they have anything?
No, they have to turn over anything that is exculpatory that would show that Koberger actually tends to show that Koberger's actually innocent. Again, and so every time the prosecution is doing a discovery dump, which is going to be a lot each and every time, they're always going to ask for reciprocal discovery. And so, absolutely. So I wouldn't expect Ms. Taylor at this point to have gotten any sort of results of experts, because they probably haven't gotten their lineup. If they do do DNA tests or that sort of thing, and they do, unfortunately for them, get a DNA expert that says, oh yeah, everything that the prosecution did, everything the laboratory did was perfect, and my final report shows that, yeah, that's Koberger's DNA, and that actually hurts them, yeah, they have to turn that over. And if it tends not to implicate Koberger, if it tends to show that there's a possibility it's not his DNA, they have to turn that over too. So it's one of those double-edged swords. They're going to bring in and get witnesses that they hope will reveal evidence on even the smallest bit of evidence that would help exculpate him. But they run the risk, just like the prosecution. We've talked about this. You and I have talked about this, and Phil's talked about this. If you do a test and it shows that it implicates Koberger, they have to turn that over too. Remember, you'd specifically mentioned, and we talked about this. Why wouldn't you do like a voice lineup or that sort of thing? Because you don't want to open up that can of worms. If you do it and it bombs on you and it bounces back and hits you in the jaw and it hurts your case, you have to turn those results over. Ms. Taylor probably hasn't yet gotten her team together to look at the DNA, which is either going to hurt or help their case. And either one, they have to turn over those results. And that's just the way it goes. They're going to turn over things probably, I would imagine, in the next 30 days, something like that, March or April, well before the June preliminary hearing. But yeah, they will eventually turn over the results of their own experts, results, and they have to.
Mike, someone's Barbara Ann is asking, wouldn't they both do mental health testing?
Not at this point, unless because of the fact that there's no insanity defense in Idaho. And there hasn't been so far any sort of request for a mental health evaluation. That issue, the mental health status of Mr. Koberger, is actually not an issue right now. Nobody's making it an issue. So therefore, nobody's going to do any sort of mental health exam on him. So it's one of those things where you'd like to see what his state of mind is. Is he insane or not? Do a personality inventory on him. But as of right now, no one's raised that issue of his mental health status. So therefore, at this point now, we don't know in the future, but at this point now, it's an irrelevant issue. Nobody's brought that to the forefront. So that's off the table right now. But that's a great question. That's a really great question.
No, absolutely. But something, I think that the parameters for a insanity defense are so high because if you can understand right from wrong and you can plan to do what you did, it shows a mental state of mind where you understood what you were doing. So I think that would exclude you from an insanity. And I'm not a lawyer, although I play one on TV. So they used to say, no, I'm not. So yeah, it's
successful.
It's not. You have to be really off the wall to get an insanity
absolutely
defense.
Absolutely.
Look, and we've seen people that represented themselves, that were clearly nuts.
I remember
recently. Go ahead.
Remember the Long Island Railroad shooter from about
19? Colin Ferguson. Yes.
Colin Ferguson. Right. He represented himself. I think actually Ted Bundy at one point, because he actually had gone to law school. I think he actually partly represented himself, but in each case, the judge always assigns an experienced trial lawyer to sit next to them to help. Just so they can never say that they did not get good counsel, and therefore they can't make an appeal if they get convicted based on insufficiency of counsel, because they'll even if they want to represent themselves, they will have the services of an attorney right next to them. So that a smart judge, every judge is going to do that. But
the saying in law is a defendant who represents himself has an idiot for a client, right?
Exactly. Your
lawyers have some good ones, and then who was Shakespeare said, "Let's kill all the lawyers," right?
Why are they so unpopular?
I don't know. Attorneys are so unpopular. So it's interesting, I think, to everyone here, and I don't think with this with Banfield's report last night. I don't think this is new smoking gun information.
No.
As we said earlier on the show, it's sort of sad that someone close to the investigation is leaking things. And actually, and if they're part of the police, if they're part of the prosecution, it's sad because they're hurting the case. And I certainly do not like to see that. I don't think the public likes to see that. And if they get caught, they're going to get arrested and charged with contempt of court, which they deserve to.
Yeah. There's too much riding on this case for anyone to taint the jury pool with rumors and innuendo. And that can only hurt the prosecution. It can't hurt Kohberger whatsoever. The least bit of doubt or the least confusion can only help him. Remember, the defense only has to show or convince one of the 12 jurors that there is some reasonable doubt. That's a very low standard. The prosecution has the burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to all 12. And so that's a much higher burden. This only hurts the prosecution and could only potentially help Kohberger.
Mike, I've said it from the very beginning. I think there's probably tractor trailers full of evidence on this case that has not yet been revealed. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the defense attorney is starting to receive some of this stuff.
Oh, sure.
Even though I don't think they're required. I don't know what the time frame now in New York City. It's gotten so ridiculous. They're supposed to give the discovery material over to the defense in 15 days, which is absolutely lunacy. Ridiculous. And that's why in New York City, I think anywhere from 75 to 80% of all misdemeanor cases are being thrown out because they can't satisfy the discovery requirements. With a case like this, how fast does the prosecution have to turn over the discovery to the defense?
Well, the discovery demands are going to come from the defense, periodically, and they got this huge dump of information. They have another hearing, the preliminary hearing. It's going to be a couple of days long, and it's the same standard. It's not. They just have to show, the prosecution just has to show part of their, case, not the whole thing, just to prove that there's probable cause. And the attorneys for the defense are going to love that because there's actually going to be live witnesses on the stand, and they could, at that point, begin to judge some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the prosecution's case, and that's great for the defense. But also at that time, they probably will then set a fairly set in stone trial date. And as you positioned, probably it's going to be later on in the fall or something like that, and I think that's probably true. Most likely, once they get the etched in stone trial date, when that gets set, before 30 days, so 31 days to however far out they go, 45 days, at that point, there'll be a final dump of discovery from the prosecution, so that therefore, going into the trial, there is at least 30 days for the defense to get that final discovery dump and analyze it. So most likely, if the date of the trial, say the trial set for December 1st, say just random day, December 1st, by November 1st, everything that the prosecution is going to use at trial will have to have already been given over to the defense, and the defense.
Mike, that date is not that far-fetched because they're going back June 26th.
Yeah.
And they're going to have 5 days of probable cause hearings.
That's going to be a big one.
You know what they're going to say at the end of that week? They're going to say, Your Honor, we would like to ask for a stay until September. That's guaranteed that's going to happen. I can almost guarantee it. And the judge, being a human being too, and want to take vacation in the summer, is going to say, okay, granted, we'll start September, whatever, a date in September, we'll start the trial, or we'll plan to start the trial.
Yeah.
And the wheels of justice turn very slowly. Before we go, I want to say a couple things. First of all, folks, If you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Please give us the like, give us the thumbs up on this. That's how YouTube judges us. Give us the thumbs up. Let us know you like it. And if you want to subscribe to us, again, on our YouTube, and you can also hit us up on Patreon or our YouTube channel. The other thing I want to mention, Mike, and I discussed this earlier, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. You think there'll be cameras in the courtroom during this case?
I'm not a fan of them. And if they would have a camera in the courtroom, I would want to see a still camera that's not panning all over the place. I'd want to see a still camera just on the witness stand and really nothing else. That would be about it. Because you remember the O.J. Simpson case. I remember the O.J. Simpson case. I'm looking at the Murdaugh case on TV. I would rather not see cameras, the camera from like the judge's point of view looking out towards the defense table, the prosecution table, and the gallery of people there. I'd want to see just one. I would rather not see it. I think in this case, if there's going to have one, just have one. But that would be all I'd want to see. I don't know what the judge is other than a law prohibiting the judge from making that decision. Maybe there's a law that says you have to have a camera and the judge can't overrule it. Maybe it's a state law. But I think in the interest of justice, it's possible that the judge might say, we're going to allow one camera and that's it. Remember, the judge, other than a law prohibiting any sort of actions, the judge is absolutely God in their courtroom. So that's what I'd want to see if they're going to do it. Just one. Just way people who have an interest in the case can at least follow along, get the information in real time so they could see it. So it's not subjected to being edited and editorialized, later on in the news. They could actually see it in real time.
Well, Mike, I would just like to say and give my vote. I'm against cameras in the courtroom.
Yeah.
I think they don't serve justice very well. I think the media puts amazing pressure on the courts for there to be cameras in the courtroom. When there are cameras in the courtroom, the judge, the attorneys, the prosecutor, the witnesses, they all play to the camera. And I think
we've seen that so many times. I remember the case with the young boy who shot during the riots in Kenosha.
Yes.
We saw the prosecutor playing to the cameras, holding up the gun and doing all kinds of things, getting his picture taken while he was doing it in the courtroom. And that's distasteful. You don't want that. You don't.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, we're at an hour and 12 minutes. We covered so much.
Yeah.
And I almost feel more educated right now. And I was on the show. Final words, Mike.
I think we should all always remember, have patience. But always remember Ms. Mogan, Ms. Gonsalves, Ms. Kernodle, and Mr. Chapin in your prayers. But also, if you think about the Kohlberger family, the poor Mr. and Mrs. Kohlberger now have to deal with this for the rest of their lives. They've lost their son. They're never going to see their son ever again in terms of being free. Whatever he is now, back when he was a little kid, they had dreams for him. Those are crushed. And just to think about them and have mercy on them too, because they also are hurting in this situation.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Kylie Gonzalez, and Madison Mogan, because we pray for them. We pray for their families. And these episodes of real crime, we don't want to overshadow that there are real human beings in this case. And in this case, real young human beings who had all kinds of hope and dreams, and all snuffed out by the craziness of a killer. And we don't ever want to forget that. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I see some folks. I'm not. Ann Liebman, thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Very much appreciated. Lou Lemoracco, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Very much appreciated, guys. Sometimes when I do these shows, I just want to mention this. I don't know if you realize it. I'm not just hosting it. I'm also producing it as it goes on, which is a lot of hats to wear. And sometimes the whole show is over, and I'm like, wow, what was that show about? I just there's a lot going on, and I really appreciate all you guys listening, giving us a thumbs up, and becoming Police Off the Cuff fans, subscribers, friends, all of those things. And I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. God bless everyone. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, Bill. And thank you for your viewers.
One episode, just saying enough.